Today is 13 November 2021. I feel very compelled to do today's video because a Singaporean doctor called Dr. Yang has been desperately trying to warn Singaporeans about the Pfizer vaccines and the Sinovac third booster shot as proposed by Ching. So today, he made a police report. The police report is against Pfizer for the failure to ensure accurate data in their clinical trials. And as a result, this is a criminal negligence. Let's look at the background of for the police report. Because it has been published in British Medical Journal, which is a very prestigious medical journal in UK, that Pfizer has actually falsified its clinical trials data. So a clinical director who was employed at the research organization, Ventavia Research Group, had actually told the British Medical Journal that Pfizer falsified data on blinded patients, employed inadequately trained vaccinators, and was slow to follow up on adverse events reported in Pfizer's phase 3 trial. And the staff in Pfizer who conducted quality control checks were overwhelmed by the volume of problems they were finding. After repeatedly notifying Ventavia of these problems, the regional director, Brooke Jackson, emailed a complaint to US FDA, but Ventavia fired her later the same day, and the very brave and righteous Brooke Jackson provided the British Medical Journal with dozens of internal company documents, photos, audio recordings, and emails to prove, or rather to whistleblow, that Pfizer had been falsifying clinical trials data. This is actually published in the British Medical Journal, so you can actually search for it on DuckDuckGo. So Ventavia's research group regional director Brooke Jackson had been fired from her job for whistleblowing about Pfizer falsifying their clinical trial data. So you can go and search up about this on DuckDuckGo. So let's continue to look at the police report. So Dr. Yang is a Singaporean medical director of 2 HSA approved vaccination centers in Singapore. Yes, he is putting his career on the line, and he would likely lose his job for whistleblowing and warning Singaporeans about the dangers of Pfizer vaccines and the third Sinovac booster shot, which has been pushed forward by Ching. We shall see that in the second post. So Dr. Yang also mentioned that Pfizer had a known convicted criminal history. Yes, it's true. Pfizer had a long criminal history. You can check that out on DuckDuckGo too. Pfizer has been fined to date, I think US $4.6 billion for various medical criminal crimes. So the police report includes a history also about the criminal investigations against FDA. So FDA itself is not fully honest. FDA also doesn't have full integrity. Let's continue. So why does Dr. Yang feel so desperate to start warning Singaporeans about the dangers of Pfizer vaccines right now, because in Singapore, vaccines had already been given to teenagers from 12 years and above, and the Singapore government, MOH, MMTF, and Ching have been pushing very hard to give Pfizer vaccines to children from 5 to 11 onwards as early as end of this year. So Dr. Yang felt that his police report is very urgent and is very imperative that the SPF move quickly to investigate the accuracy of the data being provided by Pfizer by referring to what Broad Jackson had whistleblown and provided to the British Medical Journal as proof of Pfizer falsifying its clinical trials data. So Dr. Yang is asking for the Singapore Police Force to contact Broad Jackson through the British Medical Journal and to start investigating about Pfizer's fraud in falsifying clinical trials data and to act before our local experts use the doubtful data from Pfizer to make children between 5 to 11 years old in Singapore take the Pfizer vaccine. So Dr. Yang has signed off his police report as a Singaporean whistleblower. So the Singapore government is very keen to push COVID vaccines, including Pfizer, onto children between 5 to 11 years old in Singapore as early as end of this year, if not in year 2022. So Dr. Yang feel very desperate and is very urgent to investigate Pfizer's clinical trials data before we start giving the vaccine to our young children in Singapore. Okay, let's look at, so this is what Dr. Yang had done today. He had filed a police report to look into the integrity and the accuracy of Pfizer clinical trials data. Let's look at what Dr. Yang had done yesterday. Actually, yesterday, Dr. Yang had filed a petition on change.org asking for a stop on the human experimentation on the Singapore population um, with COVID vaccines. But unfortunately, his petition was taken down by change.org within one day when its signatures has reached about 7,000 signatures. So today, Dr. Yang filed a police report to investigate Pfizer's fraudulent clinical trials data. And yesterday, he started a petition on change.org to stop giving COVID vaccines to the Singapore population as it is experimental and it is being coerced very heavy-handedly onto the Singapore population. But unfortunately, his petition on change.org was removed when it reaches about 7,000 signatures within one day. And on the 10th November 2021, that's when Dr. Yang first started making his first very desperate and loud call to stop the insanity in Singapore. Let's look at what he had done. He had sent a message to Ching saying that Ching may have made possible mathematical errors on her Facebook postings on all vaccination and other important factual matters. Ho Ching is the wife of Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, and she hates Temasek. And Temasek has invested US 250 million in BioNTech. So Temasek has invested US 250 million in Pfizer BioNTech vaccines. And Singapore EDB had invested US $500 million together with other investors in Moderna. So Singapore government have invested billions of dollars into Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Ho Ching is also on the board of Wellcome Leap, which is a company that does research in mRNA vaccines. And Pfizer is going to open a factory and office in Singapore. So the Singapore government has huge vested interest in mRNA vaccines. And the Singapore government, including Ho Ching, who has been posting non-stop on her Facebook to keep pushing COVID vaccines onto the Singapore population. But the Singapore government has resorted to very extreme, high-handed, heavy-handed, relentless measures to force the Singapore population to take COVID vaccines. It has banned the unvaccinated people in Singapore from almost everything in Singapore since 13 October 2021. And starting 1st January 2022, Singaporeans are forced to choose between jab or job. So Ho Ching, who is the head of Temasek, has been posting non-stop or a lot to push COVID vaccines onto the Singapore population. So Dr. Yang on the 10th of November 2021 had written to Ho Ching to say that she may have made mathematical errors on her Facebook post regarding COVID vaccines and other important factual matters. So Dr. Yang says that he's a medical director of two HSA approved COVID-19 vaccination centers, so he's a hyper pro vaxxer, but he has grave concerns about the third Sinovac and third Sinopharm booster shot that Ho Ching has been pushing for, because he says that the third booster shot for Sinovac and Sinopharm are de facto experiments for some population segments. This is because the data for the third booster shot for Sinovac and Sinopharm are lacking in peer-reviewed P3 data. Because in China, if you are vaccinated with two Sinovac or Sinopharm shots, you're considered fully vaccinated. But the Singapore government, perhaps in trying to force Singaporeans to take Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, which they have huge vested interest in, make it a requirement for people to take 3 Sinovac or Sinopharm booster shots to be considered fully vaccinated in Singapore. And Dr. Yang is saying that this is an experiment for some population segments, because the 3 Sinos vaccination regime, which has been pushed forward by Ho Ching, are still lacking in peer-reviewed P3 data. So Dr. Yang wondered, according to the Nuremberg Code, does he have to inform his patients that some parts of the population segments that for some parts of the population segments, the third Sinovac or Sinopharm booster shot is actually an experiment, because under the Nuremberg Code, it is any potentially deadly human experimentation requires full consent and not under duress. So Dr. Yang said it's very disturbing that a third Sinovac or Sinopharm shot, which is an experiment, may be mandatory for someone in Singapore to earn a fully vaccinated status and to keep a job. So he asked Ho Ching, could any consent conducted under strong duress be considered legal? So a coercive action to force a potentially deadly medical experiment on Singaporeans, is that legal? That's what he asked Ho Ching. And he says this is very disturbing to him at the front lines. So his message to Ho Ching also asks her, what is Ho Ching's basis to consider people who have taken third booster shot next year to be fully vaccinated instead of being considered fully vaccinated after 2 doses. So Dr. Yang is questioning Ho Ching about what is her mathematical basis. So Dr. Yang started asking Ho Ching this very important question because he felt very desperate, and it's very grave that it's a very grave situation right now in Singapore, that Singapore government is just pushing COVID vaccines very hard onto the Singapore population when he believes Pfizer has falsified clinical trials data, and Ho Ching's and Singapore government's pushing of 3 Sinovac or Sinopharm vaccine shots to be considered fully vaccinated may be an experiment for some segments of the Singapore population, because clinical trials for peer-reviewed P3 data are still lacking. So Singapore government is pushing COVID vaccines very hard onto the Singapore population, and according to Dr. Yang, he's asking, when you're coercing Singaporeans so hard to take COVID vaccines to maintain a fully vaccinated status and to keep a job, by making Singaporeans consent to taking COVID vaccines under strong duress, is this considered legal? So he posed these questions to Ho Ching. Interestingly, I managed to find a post by Ho Ching on the 7th of June this year, 2021, whereby, as usual, he dismisses vaccine groups and such warnings by Dr. Yang as fake science, fake news. And as usual, he would quote his usual group of doctors in some expert committee, who of course will echo whatever she says and she wants. It's interesting that she mentioned in her post that she suffered insomnia, reading messages and petitions urging parents not to vaccinate their teenagers and demanding the Singapore government to stop mRNA vaccines and to use Sinovac, as well as to advise giving ivermectin as treatment and prevention for COVID instead of vaccination. I suffer insomnia from reading posts like that from Ho Ching, because As we have known earlier, Singapore government and Ching, they have huge vested interest in Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So is that why they are pushing it so hard onto the Singapore population when the Pfizer clinical trials could be could have been falsified when ivermectin could be used as a treatment and prevention for COVID, but the Singapore government just simply shut down ivermectin. So, as we have seen, Dr. Paul Young has started trying to talk to Ching and the Singapore government and warn them about the dangers of pursuing a vaccination only strategy in Singapore as early as 7th of June 2021. So the Singapore government has been pursuing a vaccination only strategy, which we can see clearly by now that it has failed. Since Singapore government start vaccinating a large part of its population, Singapore is now about 85% fully vaccinated, but our number of COVID cases and COVID deaths are still very high and rising and show no signs of coming down, despite banning unvaccinated people in Singapore from almost everything for 4 weeks now. So just common sense. This is a pandemic of the vaccinated or a pandemic of the unvaccinated. This is looking like a pandemic of the vaccinated. And Singapore government keeps pushing COVID vaccines, which Dr. Yang has spoken out and said that they may pose some dangers. So Singapore government is just pushing COVID vaccines very hard on the Singapore population by using all sorts of high-handed measures, such as banning unvax from almost everything in Singapore and making Singapore employees choose between the jab or job from 1st January 2022. So by forcing such dubious vaccines onto the Singapore population by through coercion, by making them consent to such dubious vaccines under duress, Dr. Yang asked, is it a violation of the Nuremberg Code? Is it legal? Is it even legal? Okay. So I want to move on to and talk about something else that's disturbing me. So I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Yang for bringing up and being so brave to speak out for all Singaporeans in Singapore and with urgency, because we all know that the Singapore government is going to push COVID vaccines onto children between 5 to 11 years old very soon in Singapore. So thank you very much, Dr. Yang. Okay, I want to talk about something else that's disturbing me. Yesterday, somebody posted on a Telegram group very desperately and urgently and said he has an announcement to make. He said he thinks MOH is committing genocide here. His unvaccinated friend is staying in a hotel and she has to share the same room as someone who is also COVID-19 positive. And secondly, the doctors only gave her Panadol and cough mixtures, and he or she is concerned that it's not sufficient for her friend, and the friend looks very sick in the video call with him or her. So she sent some vitamin C and vitamin D3 to her hotel through Grab, and The items were rejected by the medical team. So he or she wants to know why an innocent bottle of vitamin C and vitamin D3 are rejected. These are not medicines, they are just supplements. And the doctor just called him or her back and said, this is the regulation by MOH and they do not accept such items from outside. So he or she told the doctor that if if such supplements from him or her cannot be accepted, then can the doctor prescribe to her friend? But the doctor say no, and this is MOH regulation. Is this the way MOH treats patients who are isolated in hotel and only give them Panadol and cough mixtures? So someone posted this on Telegram yesterday and said this is very urgent and desperate, and he or she would raise this issue higher up and will make it viral. So so it seems that so it seems that so it seems that so it seems that MOH is just asking doctors to only give Panadol and maybe cough syrup and flu medication for COVID treatment. And that's it. But this is clearly inadequate treatment for COVID, because by now we know that ivermectin may be able to treat COVID, because Indonesia, Japan, India, and in Africa they have used ivermectin to treat COVID successfully. But Singapore government keeps shutting down ivermectin, and the reason could be because if ivermectin is a proven cure for COVID, then the Singapore government can no longer authorize the use of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines onto the Singapore population through EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. So the Singapore government may be very keen to shut down ivermectin as a proven cure for COVID, because the Singapore government has huge vested interest in Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and it wants to, maybe that's why Singapore government keeps wanting to give COVID vaccines onto the Singapore population. Okay, let's look at another post. This is on Gilbert's Go Facebook. So Geraldine Go said her dad went to A&E because he had COVID symptoms, but he was sent home as he tested negative, and then the A&E doctor gave him only cough syrup, flu medication, and Panadol. So 3 days later, he decided to go to a polyclinic to see the doctor again because he felt giddy and his dry cough got worse and he lost his sense of taste. And we know that this is a symptom of COVID. However, he was sent home again as he tested negative, and 3 days later, his conditions deteriorated and he passed away at home. According to the doctor, he passed away due to pneumonia. So Geraldine is just wondering if the hospital staff had admitted her father to hospital earlier and have done a blood test and CT scan on him, it would have detected the lung infection earlier and her father would not have died. So Geraldine asked, are we going to lose more lives if healthcare workers are sending patients home and telling them to do home recovery? And yes, that is what we have been finding out, and this is very disturbing, that anybody with COVID symptoms, when they go to a GP, they're just sent home with Panadol to do home recovery. And when somebody goes to A&E, she's he or she would just also be sent home with cough syrup, flu medication, and Panadol to do home recovery. And then some people may have deteriorating health very fast and then get very sick. Or in this case, Geraldine Go's father, who passed away at home when doing home recovery. This is extremely disturbing. Let's look at another post. Also on Gilbert's Go, also on Gilbert's Go Facebook. This is by Ariel. It's a this is a statement by Ariel to MOH issued through Gilbert Go. So Ariel said when her daughter was sick and tested art positive, so she took her daughter to a clinic, and the clinic said the symptoms are mild, so just do home recovery. Hospitals won't accept. So she took her daughter home for home recovery, and then but during home recovery her symptoms worsened and she went to another clinic. But the clinic, as usual, asked her daughter to stay home and do home recovery, and then her daughter's health started deteriorating very fast. And then she went to the same clinic at Y again and was again asked to stay home for home recovery. So she has been to she has made 3 clinic trips to to take her doctor to take her daughter to seek treatment for COVID, but 3 times she was just asked to bring her daughter home for home recovery, and she saw with her own eyes how her daughter's health deteriorated right before her eyes and was sent home by these clinics. Okay, so Ariel is a father, sorry. So he felt so helpless. So, but fortunately, he managed to call Tan Tock Seng Hospital, and the Tan Tock Seng Hospital say why didn't the clinic doctors call MOH to send isolation transport to hospital and then ask the father to bring the daughter to the hospital. And when she was admitted at Tan Tock Seng Hospital for COVID, the daughter has low blood count and asthma and was told, and the call center had checked her SpO2 fluctuates. So fortunately, despite having deteriorating health from COVID, because of being sent home to do home recovery from 3 clinic visits, fortunately the daughter managed to recover in the hospital and got discharged. So I just want to say, it's extremely disturbing that we are hearing such news on social media and from sources, from friends, and on Telegram posts, that people are just being sent home for home recovery when they have COVID with just Panadol. So clinic doctors just give them Panadol and send them home for home recovery if they have COVID. And even when they go to the A&E, the doctors just give them cough syrup, flu medication, and Panadol. And MOH actually refused to let people bring supplements like vitamin D3 and vitamin C for their loved ones or friends when they are being quarantined for COVID. Why is that so? Because by now, we all know what can treat COVID and what can prevent COVID. Vitamin D3, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, Avrovil, even amla powder. These natural supplements can help to prevent and cure COVID. And there are some TCM remedies that also can help cure COVID. So why are supplements even being denied to be given to COVID patients who are being quarantined to help them to recover faster from COVID? We Singapore is technically in a pandemic right now. So why are such medical care and medical health supplements being denied by MOH to be given to COVID patients? This is very disturbing. This we also have to question MOH about this, because otherwise more and more Singaporeans would just fall very sick from COVID during home recovery, or worse, even die from COVID during home recovery. So we have to question MOH about this. And one last thing, it's understood that remdesivir is being used as a treatment for COVID in hospitals for severe cases. WHO has already said remdesivir should not be used to treat COVID, but MOH is still using remdesivir for COVID patients, and we have heard that remdesivir can cause acute kidney failure. And then after that, they will hook the person up to a ventilator, which may actually worsen his lungs, the person's lungs. So we have to, this is the current hospital protocols by MOH. So we also have to question MOH on this. So we have to question the entire COVID treatment and hospital protocols for Singaporeans by MOH. So why is MOH proposing all these health and medical protocols for COVID patients in Singapore, such as home recovery with just Panadol, home recovery with just cough syrup and flu medication, and no supplements, denying supplements to COVID patients? And we also have to question the hospital protocol of remdesivir and ventilator.